Welcome back to the Global Startup Movement. I'm your host, Andrew Berkowitz. Today's episode features Australia's leading figure in IoT, Eitan Bienstock. Eitan is the founder and CEO of Everything IoT, an organization that hopes to connect corporates, government entities, and entrepreneurs to build and grow Australia's Internet of Things ecosystem. Eitan has spent over 10 years investing in companies and in corporate venture capital, including developing Intel's first incubator program in Israel. Eitan now spends his time serving on numerous advisory boards and investing in IoT startups throughout both Israel and Australia. As always, be sure to connect with me on Snapchat at Ann Burke. That's Ann, B-E-R-K, for behind-the-scenes footage from this episode and Snapchat takeovers from entrepreneurs and VCs all around the world. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Eitan Bienstock, the founder and CEO at Everything IoT.
Entrepreneurship has become a global phenomenon. Uncover the stories of entrepreneurs and investors worldwide, from sub-Saharan Africa to Silicon Valley and beyond, here on the Global Startup Movement. Now, here's your host, Andrew Berkowitz.
So, Eitan, start us off with a little bit about you and why you started Everything IoT.
Sure. Hi, Andrew. So about me, I've been in the startup corporate scene for the last 20-something years. I started my tech career, I guess, joining Intel in Israel back in 1996. At that time, we were in Intel Israel announcing a new fab, and that was a major investment on the part of Intel and the part of the government of Israel. The government of Israel committed $600 million to build this new fab. And in return, Intel committed to develop a best effort program that will actually support the local high-tech ecosystem. We even didn't call them startups. So my first job in Intel was to deliver on that commitment and that promise. So I built an incubator. I got dozens of companies involved. And it basically helped them with the alpha site, beta sites, and commercialization, connecting them to Intel network worldwide. So I spent a few years in Israel running this program, and later on I joined the Intel Capital in San Francisco. So throughout my work, both in Israel and in the Valley, I'm a strong believer of global presence or global view and collaboration, and also on the ability of big corporates to support startups. Now, if you look back 20 years, corporates, some of them had involvement with startups. They decided to develop corporate venturing arms. Intel Capital was by far the biggest and the leader back then. But back then, corporates didn't really need startups. Today, it's a bit different. Both sides need each other tremendously. And I am a great believer that corporates, when they are doing the job right, they can actually support startups. So in Australia, in the last 3 years, what had happened is that the whole startup ecosystem started to develop. And 2 years ago, I realized that a few critical things were missing. Two of the things that were missing is that the global perspective. So for startups to understand what is going on around the world, Australians, whether it's the tyranny of distance or other reasons, tend to not to look up too much, rather developing over here. And that frustrated me when I first arrived here 15 years ago, and what's still going on. So I thought, how can we open up that view and help startups connect and understand what is going on around the world? The other thing that was missing is that a connection to multinationals. And if you look at Israel today, there are about 500 R&D centers of multinationals in Israel. Obviously, it became known as a startup nation, but a main reason why it happened, Israel is so successful is because of the presence of all those big companies, those leaders in the Israeli scene. So in Australia, we are way behind that. We hardly have any R&D centers of any large corporate or multinationals in Australia. So I set up Everything IoT with the view that we need a focus in Australia. Another problem was that people were doing mainly apps and websites. They call themselves technology companies, but there was no really focus. And if you look at Israel over many decades, you'll recognize that roughly every decade there was a new focus as a nation. So if you look at the 60s, we had to develop the agricultural space. It was a new country, it was very bare land, and we needed to basically grow food. So systems like irrigation systems and many others, innovation in the agricultural space have developed. Later on, in the 70s, 80s, semiconductors started to be a major focus, and hence Intel developed a few fabs and grow its operation in Israel, and other companies, Tower Semiconductors and so on, and many smaller ones. So it was around the 70s, 80s. Then we had communication. So companies like Amdocs and others really were innovative in the communication space. Where if you look at today, for example, cybersecurity is a major focus. We have others now. Just the most recent one is the mobility and automated car. So as a country, every few years there was a focus areas and a lot of resources, universities, education, and funding went into those focus areas. Australia, we didn't have any of it, and I thought that IoT would be a great place to start.
Got it. And with the multinationals, do you personally see IoT companies as coming in as disruptors, similar to an Uber or an Airbnb? Or do you think that partnerships with the current incumbents is going to be the pathway to success for IoT startups?
Yeah, I think partnership is actually much more important those days than ever before. Steve Case talked about it in his latest book, The Third Wave of Innovation, and IoT particularly requires interoperability and standards. IoT is a major disruptor to many industries. And I think that now as a global industry or in the slowest sector, it's been realized that no one company can do it alone, and collaboration is essential. If you try to connect sensors or many different devices, try to work on different standards of communication, even the data or the data space, how do you make different databases talk to each other and uniforms. So, yeah, I think collaboration is super important.
What are your thoughts on the current market opportunity in IoT of consumer versus B2B, which do you anticipate being the bigger market over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it's quite evident that at this point is the B2B or the enterprise or, the industrial IoT. It's a much bigger opportunity. I think that you can show ROIs much quicker there. You can optimize the processes, machines, all the area of preventing maintenance and optimization is quite clear in many industries. And corporates start to see the benefits. I think that on consumer side, it will take a while until we're really able to figure out the real value. I mean, connecting your toasters and so on, it's not really appealing. I think we're seeing some movement. For example, Echo is a great example, the Amazon Echo, and how this is going to finally start to move the whole smart home space. Of course, Nest is one of the earliest successes in the space, but I think consumers, if you look, one of the examples I always talk about is the Apple Watch, right? The Apple Watch, after a few other watches before that, I don't think really have proven to have any value to consumers, besides being cool for the first few months that you wear it. There's no really killer applications there. You can do everything on your phone much better. And you have your phone anyway with you. So I think the consumers, wearables in particular, will take a while. I think retail is starting to adopt IoT. But I think that the application in industry, whether it's agriculture, whether it's transport, whether it's resources and energy, even healthcare, we start to see interesting things, it's going to be before.
Are you seeing or are you noticing specific verticals within IoT in Australia getting more traction or more attention from VCs than others?
Yes. So we started Everything IoT 2 years ago by running the first summit. Now we are in our third summit after running 6 different events. Quite early on, we realized that one of the areas is agriculture. So if you think about it, where Australia, I'm talking about Australia right now, where Australia have some advantage is the space, the land, a huge land and very few people on it. And agriculture is definitely an area of focus that we realized then, and it's showing up now. We see a lot of startups popping out in the agricultural space, whether it's on the ground or in the air, different drones applications, different smart cameras to monitor crops or to monitor livestock and so on. But agriculture, I would say it's, for me, not the number one areas where we see the quickest movement in Australia.
That makes sense. One thing I'd be curious to hear about your opinion on, having managed Intel's Israel incubator, what are some of the differences that you've seen in your experience working with Israeli entrepreneurs versus Australian entrepreneurs, whether it's mindset differences or cultural differences? Yeah.
There are some major differences, and I'm still working with Israeli entrepreneurs as an investor, as a mentor, and also as a customer. The differences, there is a difference of directness, of course, and difference of urgency. So in Israel, things get done much, much quicker, and there is higher accountability. In Australia, often it's a bit frustrating, that aspect of it. It's a bit slower, and people are less direct, so they're not going to say exactly what they mean, or they're not going to say no if it's a no, they're going to say yes. So this is in general in terms of working relationships. Israelis we are by nature out-of-the-box thinkers. We like to argue, and we make meetings sometimes difficult, but at the end, we come to more creative solutions and things that can be executed quite quickly. That's one aspect. That's on a personal level of entrepreneurs. Of course, as an ecosystem, there's huge differences from the investment community and the maturity of the VC community. The biggest difference, actually, I would say, is that if you meet Israeli startups, roughly 8 out of 10, you'll find out that the founders have a strong technical background. In Australia, it's probably in reverse. You'll find that 2 companies out of 10 have a strong technical background. So what I find is that Israelis tend to have a really strong technology, and then they spend the time to figure out what is the biggest problem that technology can solve. They'll spend about a bit of time, what's the business model, where it should be applied. But once that is fine, when they find that, they can run pretty quickly. In Australia, it's, for the most part, it's entrepreneurs with good ambition and drive, but they wake up in the morning and they think about what's the problem that needs to be solved. But they don't really have much competitive advantage or a technology background to actually defend that solution. That's a major difference, and the good news that it's starting to change. I see quite good change in the last 2 years, where engineers and researchers, which are plentiful in Australia, so there is really strong research and strong universities and strong R&D, government R&D organization called CSIRO. So on the research front, they are very strong, but the commercialization is very weak. And that's starting to change. We start to see more tech people leaving universities, leaving big corporates, leaving research organization, and give it a try. So I'm hopeful that percentage of 2 out of 10 will start to change.
What parties in Australia would you say are currently driving that change? Is it coming from the university system, or is it just kind of a grassroots movement by the startup community?
I think it's a combination of a number of elements. One is the that there is a buzz. Startup here became a buzzword in the last 2 years. Before that, it was someone else. It became a buzzword, and there's a lot of commotion around the incubators and accelerators and co-working spaces, and it's starting to be a bit cool. So people see that there is an option to be an entrepreneur, and failure is an option as well. So Australians, failure is something or risk-taking is something that they were really opposed to. So I think that aspect is changing. I think the government, although changing policies very often, every time there is a new government, the policies changes or a new prime minister. There were a couple of serious efforts there was an innovation statement that the prime minister laid out. It's now about a year ago. And so government putting in place programs, funding. There are some funding given to specific CRC, it's called research and commercialization funds. But I think it's actually more than the government, it's more bottom up. People starting to realize that entrepreneurship is cool and viable option. Also, there is so Australia has one big success really in the space, which is Atlassian. And the Atlassian founders are quite active in the ecosystem and promoting it and showing the way, supporting some VCs and so on. So it's good to have one success. We need now to have a few more of those successes. Again, drawing back from Israel, late 90s, where we had our first two successes were Checkpoint Software and Mirabilis, so ICQ, that was sold to AOL, and Checkpoint Software went IPO. They were the two really first big stories in Israel, and everybody kind of got excited about it and started to see that as an option.
Worldwide, we've seen the proliferation of industry-focused funds like a fintech or a biotech fund. Specifically within Australia, what do IoT startups, what does the fundraising landscape look like for them, specifically when it comes to raising smart capital locally?
Yeah, we are actually planning to have an IoT fund. We'll announce it early next year because there's no any specific IoT funds in Australia. We do see, obviously, other funds. They are not specialized on IoT, but they do invest in IoT. Blackbird Ventures is one of them that have done a few investments in the space, and some others. But, IoT is so big, and it's really disrupt almost every industry that you would always have general funds investing in IoT, obviously. I do think that there is a place for a specific fund to focus on IoT. And even within that, you probably want to focus on a few verticals like we do. So we focus on four verticals in our activities in Everything IoT, which are the main verticals.
What are the four verticals that you focus on?
So we focus on, as I mentioned before, agriculture and food technologies, smart cities and transport, healthcare and well-being, and resources and energy. Those are the four main sectors, I would say, that we focus on. I think that it's interesting that we see that industry boundaries are getting eliminated. So sectors as we know them will disappear in the next few years. If you look at, obviously, Amazon or Facebook or Google, and what are they? What is Amazon? Is it a book company? Is it an online retailer? Is it an IoT company? Is it a consumer electronics? Now they have Echo. It's so many things. Is it a bank? So it's quite clear that the sector's boundaries are being demolished by disruption of technologies. And I think that is also one of the reasons for example, we have a big summit coming up in October 11 and 12, expecting about 800 people, 50 startups, about 50 speakers. And we have all those four forums there. We call all those sectors, we divide them into forums, but they're all going to be areas we're going to include in the summit. And I think the the cross knowledge and cross innovation between the sectors is very valuable. So if you have banks, so for example, one of our biggest supporters and partners are Commonwealth Bank. They look across the board. They don't look just on fintech companies that can disrupt them. And they are really involved in innovation from agriculture to mining to quantum